Just giving everyone a chance to join. And we're a couple of minutes past, so I think we can start now. We've got a lot of people who have joined. So welcome everyone. My name is Brian Martin, Director of Product Management at Integrity360. And I'm joined here today by Matt Quinn, Director of Sales Engineering in XM Cyber for Europe. So welcome to our launch webinar on CTEM as a service, and delighted you can all join us. Just for anyone who doesn't know who we are, Integrity360 is the largest independent, dedicated pan-European cyber services business. And we specialize in cybersecurity. It's all we do. We've grown both organically and through acquisition to over 500 staff, most of whom are technical cyber experts, serving over 2,000 clients across Europe and in business for 20 odd years. We have 5 SOCs across Dublin, Sofia, Stockholm, Naples, and Cape Town. And we really aim to offer an end-to-end cybersecurity portfolio to our customers. Our portfolio of offerings comprise of advanced cybersecurity solutions to help customers with their cybersecurity needs, a range of different professional services practices across technology, cyber risk and assurance consulting, cybersecurity testing, incident response services, and payments and PCI compliance. And we also offer a full range of managed security services. Our solution areas, so the domains of cybersecurity that we cover, comprise threat exposure management, which is a key topic that we're going to cover today, but also threat detection and response, cloud security, network security, application security, governance, risk and compliance, data security, identity security, and human-based security. So whatever your cybersecurity requirements, we likely have offerings, but technology and services that can help in those areas. So getting on to today's agenda, we're going to talk a bit about the challenges around exposure management. We're going to cover what is CTEM, or Continuous Threat Exposure Management. Then Matt Quinn, the Sales Engineering Director from XM Cyber, is going to give an overview and a demo of the XM Cyber Continuous Exposure Management Platform and how it can enable and operationalize CTEM. I'll talk a bit about at the end, after Matt, around our service launch and what is our CTEM as a service offering. And then there'll be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So you'll see in the menu that there is a Q&A button where you can put in your questions, and we'll make sure to get to those at the end. So getting started then, what are the challenges with exposure management? Well, as we know, and as I think we're going to articulate further, exposures is about a lot more than just vulnerabilities. However, vulnerabilities do comprise a part of exposure management. And as we can see from the chart here, the number of new vulnerabilities being published every year and being discovered is growing, and in recent years appears to be growing exponentially. So I'm going to pause and just do a quick poll, because I've asked this before, and we get it's good to get a sense of how people and clients and organizations are getting on with their vulnerability management programs. So I'll just publish a quick poll, which you should see appear now on your screen. So if you could just answer, how happy are you with managing vulnerabilities within your organization? Don't do it at all, needs improvement, all the way up to totally covered. So we'll just give that a minute and see what the feedback is. Yeah, as expected, and based on previous polls, most organizations tend to be in the second and third, so in those middle two brackets. Okay, so Just counting down, 3, 2, 1. And as you can see there, 80% of organizations who responded said, yeah, we detect some, but needs improvement. And with 20% saying there is we detect them and then prioritize. So that's interesting insight as we move forward in our discussion today. And those findings reiterate what we generally understand, that most organizations struggle to remediate their vulnerabilities, whilst, never mind being on top of the other categories of exposures that we're going to talk about. Then you've got the likes of risk-based vulnerability management, which tries to put a bit more, I guess, process around both detecting, assessing, and prioritizing, and the vulnerabilities and exposures, and then putting in place the compensating controls and remediations required. However, based on our experience and conversations, even, and according to Gartner, even taking a risk-based vulnerability management approach might not be sufficient. And certainly fixing every known vulnerability is operationally infeasible. And we can see from the poll that only 20% are even getting into that space in the first place. But then again, let's not just limit our thinking to vulnerabilities, because the categories of exposure extend way beyond vulnerabilities. So yes, vulnerability is a big category, but also you got to think about misconfigurations, you got to think about identities and permissions, who's got access to what, and who's a member of which groups, and are those groups correctly permissioned? Have you got your security controls in place, and are they actually functioning? Is there misuse of SaaS applications going on in terms of leaking of data or misuse? Even the people, the security awareness of your individuals is an exposure. The physical security of your environment is an exposure. Then you've also got supply chain. You've got credentials that can often be stolen or leaked and dumped on the open, deeper, dark web. And AI, the introduction of AI and generative AI also represents a new form of exposure that most organizations have to think about now these days. And the reality is, an exposure is anything that may be exploited by a bad actor to achieve their objectives. And why is this important? Well, attackers don't tend to be successful just by exploiting one vulnerability or one exposure. They typically chain exposures and build their attack paths. They use techniques and tactics to do reconnaissance, perform their initial attack, establish their foothold, expand their access, do more internal reconnaissance, perform lateral movement, escalate their privileges, and ultimately identify and access their objectives, which typically will be your critical assets, could be your data, could be your critical systems. So understanding that exposures can be throughout the environment is very, very important to consider when thinking about how you manage this risk. So what is it? What is CTEM then? What is continuous threat exposure management? Well, the term was coined by Gartner in recent years. And first of all, to say that CTEM is a program, it's not a specific technology, although there are many technologies out there that can help manage it. But it's actually a program, and it's an integrated, iterative approach to prioritizing potential treatments and continually refining your security posture improvements. What's critical for CTEM is that you adopt both the attackers and the defenders' views to combine them to minimize your exposure to both present and future threats. So it's really important to think about this as a program that sits within the organization in order to adopt this mindset and continually evaluating what are those exposures, which are the important ones, and how do I go about mitigating that risk. And CTEM generally involves 5 stages. There's a scoping stage where you look at the scenarios, the threat landscape, understand what are actually your critical assets and what are your critical environments. So you have to scope really what exposures what risks those exposures create, what are the critical things that you need to protect within your environment. Secondly, then there's a discovery phase. Discover all those exposures I talked about earlier, whether they're CVEs, misconfigurations, cloud risks, identity risks, permissions risks, credential risks, whether that's on-prem, in the cloud, or hybrid. And look at that whole attack graph, those different paths that can evolve for an attacker to get from a breach point to those critical assets. Obviously, then there's a prioritization, because generally the list is longer, as we know, than we can deal with immediately. So what are the threats that are in the wild, exploitable in the wild, getting that holistic understanding of the attack surface and mapping out those attack paths to those critical assets. Then the validation stage looks at, yeah, well, what actually of those prioritized exposures are actually exploitable? What are the compensating controls that you can put in place? It could be a patch. It might be other types of controls. And identifying where you can get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of remediating that risk. And then crucially, where a lot of organizations struggle and fail is the mobilization piece. Because as we know, many of us sitting within the domain of security realize that the actual resolver groups don't sit within our domain. They sit within different functions in the organization, whether it be IT or an infrastructure team or DevOps, or maybe third-party providers who provide services into that infrastructure. So the mobilization is crucial as part of CTEM to make sure everyone's aligned across the business about what needs to be done and how it needs to be done, and the justification for doing it, the guidance for that, including things like, integrating into ticketing systems and tracking the progress of those remediations. And so what the CTEM, when you bring this together in a holistic program with these different stages that continuously loop, enables the business to operate securely with a process that can execute and scale, answer the questions, where are we most vulnerable to exploitation and what's been done, foster that security and IT team alignment, and actually focus on the things that really genuinely reduce the risk in the environment and free up the resources that otherwise could be focusing and fixing the wrong things. So I'm sure many people on the call have heard of CTEM before and have looked into it. So I'm just going to do another quick poll to see where people are on their journey. So just give me one moment and I'll open the second poll. So where are you on your CTEM journey? Everything from never heard of it before, that's why I'm here, to we're well down the road to having a functioning CTEM program within the organization. Give another few seconds just to let those answers come in. Thanks for everyone who responded. And just sharing the results there. So yeah, interestingly, nobody's well down the road. There are 29% that have actually started a program, but that's great to see. 29% hearing mostly for the first time, and good for you looking into it or have started. So it's early days. All right, so that's interesting insights there. Thank you everyone for responding to the poll. So how do you operationalize CTEM? Well, obviously we're here today to talk about the CTEM as a service from Integrity360. However, that's underpinned by the XM Cyber continuous exposure management platform. So I'm just going to hand over to Matt Quinn from XM Cyber to talk through the platform and its capabilities. Over to you, Matt.
Nice one, Brian. Yeah, great introduction there. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the kind of methodology of XM Cyber, but also I've gone slightly rogue. I've added a slide that no one was aware of, so hopefully it goes well. But actually, it was some research that I saw from Microsoft just over last weekend, which actually really validates the CTEM approach. So it was some research that Microsoft did around a ransomware group called Storm 0501, very memorable name there. You know, what's interesting, they've been around for a while. They target quite a lot of different industries, hospitals, government, manufacturing, transportation. They use quite a lot of different flavors of ransomware, but have moved to a new flavor. But what's interesting to this is, again, they are using a wide set of exposures. They're not just focused on CVEs. There's a wide set of issues that they're taking advantage of. They're using CVEs. They're using either stolen credentials, but also gathering credentials during their, you know, lateral movement. They're compromising on-premise infrastructure like domain controllers, taking advantage of misconfigurations like users that don't have MFA, unhooking EDRs, you know, and some of the most kind of common EDRs. So we can't put all of our eggs in the EDR basket and hope that we're protected. But also what's interesting here again is that the attacker is pivoting from on-prem to cloud. We have to really understand, you know, what the opportunities are that an attacker can take to get into the cloud. Cloud is not just a cloud problem. You know, often cloud is an on-prem problem that can move into the cloud. And many organizations have sort of lifted and shifted a lot of infrastructure from on-prem to cloud. So we need to have this better understanding. So this is really what XM Cyber do. We underpin Integrity360's service. We run continuous and safe attack simulations to understand these wider set of exposures, things like vulnerabilities or exploitable vulnerabilities, credential issues, Active Directory problems, also proving if there's a lack of network segmentation, but also understanding the opportunity the attacker can take to move from on-prem into cloud environments or Kubernetes environments, and eventually compromise an organization's most critical assets. This is part of what Integrity will do with customers, is to understand what is critical and actually start to prioritize remediation actions. The challenge is, as we saw before, there's lots of opportunities an attacker can take, lots of entry points, and lots of possible attack paths that exist across the whole organization. So the key is to do this continuously, but at scale as well, to understand all the opportunities. And by understanding the opportunities, we can then make very good decisions. This is something that the i360 team will do with you, is understand, okay, look, there are exposures, in this case, example, a vulnerability. All the conditions exist within your environment to actually prove that it can be attacked, but there is no onward path to anything that is critical. So it doesn't need the highest priority today. There might be other issues though. This is what we call and refer to as choke points. This is where there are the largest amount of attack paths that flow through these points that put the most amount of critical systems at risk. And again, you know, it could be e-commerce platforms, PCI environments, manufacturing zones, customer data, you know, whatever keeps the business going. We need to understand what these are. And if we fix these, and as part of the service is designed to identify these and prioritize them, this is the least amount of effort for Integrity360's customers to reduce risk for the least resource, essentially. So this is also helping fix that kind of resource problem, essentially. And this is a measurable improvement. I'm just going to give you a very brief demonstration of what the kind of engine looks like behind the product. So if we sort of look a little bit at some of the kind of common key stages of CTEM, the first one really is this scoping, right? What is in scope? On-prem cloud, Kubernetes, multiple clouds, you know, whatever it is, understand the scope and then build scenarios. These are business questions that are going to target the things that are most critical to help us understand what the risk is to that criticality. Integrity360's service will work with you to build these scenarios to actually understand. They're very easy to build and very easy to interpret. In the background, the platform is then building up a sort of map of the environment or multiple environments. This is representative of more of an on-premise type environment here. This is done automatically by the platform. What we're very focused on is how can an attacker compromise this customer database? This has been identified as one of the most important things we must understand. So I'm going to play through this simulation just to help you understand sort of what the platform's doing. So from a real attacker's perspective, the attacker is running reconnaissance in the environment. The blue arrows here are, our attacker learning about the different parts of the environment. But again, we're not running any real attacks or sending any network connections or anything. This is all done by the solution, the software, and the integrations with the cloud. So it's a completely safe approach to this. You'll see some systems turning in red. This is our attacker compromising these via one or many exposures. Again, there's multiple exposures in the environment. In fact, every system can have multiple exposures. I'll quickly fast forward to the end here. What we can see is quite a wide number of different systems. Where should we focus? Well, what we need to do is understand what are the opportunities and paths that led to the critical asset. And you can see here things like exposures such as credential problems and misconfigurations. We can see in this second major step, an exploitable vulnerability, one that has been proven can be attacked from this part of the environment to this part environment, which is proving a lack of network segmentation here as well. And the last step is a misconfiguration, another misconfiguration around Oracle. So again, we need to think about more than just CVEs because they may never play a part in the breach, or they might play just a portion of it. What the sort of part of the clever source of what XM Cyber does is we're calculating every possible path. So the attacker might go left, another attacker might go right. We need to understand what all those avenues are. And by understanding all those avenues, it allows us to understand what we call a choke point. That's that sort of green circle that I showed in the presentation there. This is the one place that if we fix this issue, it reduces the risk by the largest amount. And again, we'll do that across and answer questions from a third-party risk perspective. We'll answer questions around the Active Directory environments. We'll understand risks within Azure, but we'll also understand the hybrid attack paths that could exist from on-prem to cloud to give you that true attacker's understanding of exposure. Again, we support AWS, we support GCP and Kubernetes. The last piece I really wanted to focus on is this prioritization, validation, and mobilization. So actually getting the teams within your organizations to actually be able to fix these issues. And with the context that we've got, we can really help drive that efficiency and drive that adoption. So here we can see an organization, they've got on-prem environments, they've got cloud. And what we can see is that the largest risk to their overall critical assets is actually this CVE, this Log4j vulnerability. And the key here is that there's 83 devices that can be compromised by Log4j. This is a much different list to the lists that you're used to right now, which is a list of vulnerabilities, but not a list of ones that can actually be exploited in the context of your environment. So you may be looking at hundreds of instances of Log4j. In reality, it's a much smaller list that can actually be attacked. And if you see on the explanation here, only 2 of them are choke points. Only 2 of them lead onwards to the compromise of just under a quarter of the critical assets in this business. 2 is a much easier list to deal with to reduce risk. And this is where infrastructure teams are very happy with the kind of output that XM provides and that i360 will provide, because it's a much smaller reduction in risk, or much smaller set of steps to do. We'll give all the technical details so that the different teams can understand it. We'll give you all the unique conditions that XM has tested to confirm that this is exploitable. A quick tip, your common vulnerability scanner has no idea about this particular value and therefore will misreport or even not report at all on certain vulnerabilities that actually can or can't be exploited. So this is a much more truer understanding of the exploitability. And then we allow you to remediate and mobilize the teams. This service will integrate with ServiceNow, Jira, other tools so that you can actually mobilize the teams to remediate these problems efficiently. We do that across all of these different types of exposures. The last piece I wanted to leave you on before I hand back to Brian is really that this is a continuous process and you'll see your improvements over time, right? You'll see these risks. And should there be any new risks that come into the environment that put critical assets at risk, we'll then prioritize those, allow you to fix those issues, and you'll see your score go back up again. I can hear Fido or one of the dogs in the background telling me, Matt, shut up, you need to hand back to Brian. So I'm going to hand back over to you, Brian, if that's okay.
That's great. Thanks a million, Matt. Brilliant overview of the platform and the power to uncover all of those exposures, and then also put piece the jigsaw together in terms of how they could be exploited in attack paths. Then an attacker could get to your critical assets. So I'll just go back into my screen. Hope you found that useful. So where does our service come in to help with all of this? Well, the platform, powerful as it is, needs somebody to run it, to manage it, to get the most value out of it. So our CTEM as a service offering, based upon the XM Cyber Continuous Exposure Management Platform, is designed to help organizations implement the CTEM program and consequently massively reduce cyber risk, because ultimately that is the promise and the objective of putting in place something like this. So how does the service work? Well, you need to set up the platform. You need to see where you're going to deploy sensors into the environment, configure everything. And also crucially for that mobilization piece, who are the resolver groups in the organization? And what are the processes that the organization uses to get things resolved? So mapping all of that out up front, putting that in place. Then that initial value of that discovery phase, that scoping phase. So creation and the initial creation of, well, what are the critical assets you need to protect? What are the potential breach points in the environment that you want to map into the platform? And what are the typical, the attack scenarios that you want to configure, that you want the solution to continuously monitor and test for? So that's something you do up front, but it doesn't stand still because this is a continuous process. Then there's the discovery, identification of exposures, attack paths, and choke points. So it is all the output of the solution and analyzing that to help understand, the remediation prioritization. What are the top critical assets that are at risk? What are the entities that have exposures that are on choke points that need to be resolved? So all of the support and management around that. Helping with the remediation management and validation. So the service includes, for example, integration into resolver group ticketing systems like ServiceNow and Jira to be able to push out the identification of which exposures need to be resolved, what are the entities that are assets that are affected by that, and step-by-step guidance for how to go about remediating that, and then tracking all of that and doing that in a continuous loop on an ongoing basis. And then at the heart of it, the ongoing operational management of the platform as well, making sure that it's performing as designed and that it's evolving and improving as the overall environment evolves and as the threat landscape evolves as well. So the objectives then are ultimately it's about cyber risk reduction, identifying exposures that contribute towards attack paths from a variety of breach points to critical assets, identifying which remediations give the biggest return, choking off all the possible attack paths, and planning and tracking the implementation to drive that risk down. Helping with the prioritization, practical and targeted recommendations of what to remediate first, and doing that with direct integration into the environment, eliminating the highest exposure risks from the environment. And then finally, where a lot of programs fail, the remediation delivery. So ongoing support for the execution of the remediation process volume delivery, managing and tracking the implementation, and validating that the remediations, when executed, have resolved the actual exposure. And ultimately what this does, and what we hear from security teams, is generally they don't have the capacity to manage all this themselves. So it takes a huge load off the security team, because they can oversee it, they can get the visibility, they can get their overall security posture score, if you like, and how it's trending over time. But there's a service there, there's a platform, and there's a service to help the execution side of that, driving that risk reduction. We've offered a couple of service tiers in the service. So underpinned by XM Cyber platform, both tiers will support the platform setup and configuration, the ongoing platform operational management, the exposure detection and prioritization coming out of the solution. And then some organizations do have a good, resourcing and a process. They're happy to manage themselves around the remediation management. So if that's not needed, they don't need to take that level of service. But if they want the full remediation management service, then they can go for the continuous exposure management tier and get that included. And then also what we find is some organizations struggle with the resourcing of the resolver groups themselves. How do I actually execute, those remediations, whether it be in the cloud or on Linux servers or on Windows devices or on network appliances, on security devices. So we've got a range of resource augmentation services that can help with the remediation side as well, if that is required. There's a more comprehensive service feature matrix available here, so you can see within the tiers what's available, and for example, the cadence of, there's continuous communication going on between the service team and the customer, looking at the attack scenarios, the output of the platform, the choke point identification, the remediation, prioritization and guidance, regular service calls, and regular reporting, and evolving the attack scenarios throughout the lifetime of the service as well. And just stepping back again, okay, this is, it sounds a bit techy about looking into, the hybrid environment and the, identifying things like, permissions, credentials, cached credentials, CVEs, etc. But the business use cases, what does this actually deliver? If you think about your things you're actually concerned about from a business perspective, it's things like your hybrid cloud security, your supply chain risk, vulnerability prioritization, the impact of a zero-day vulnerability, being ready for ransomware, a ransomware attack in your environment, even just things like risk reporting, M&A, risk analysis, security of OT. And hopefully you're seeing where CTEM can help in all of these areas, because if you've mapped out all of your breach points, your critical assets, then, and attack paths, exposures, and identified and mitigated the risk associated with that, that means then, for example, just to take one example, ransomware readiness. If an endpoint has been exploited, then in some shape or fashion, the work you've done to remediate exposures on choke points to critical assets means that that blast radius, if you like, of that initial access is really, really contained, and helps you be, feel much more secure from the perspective of the impact of a ransomware event. And you can apply a similar type of logic to all of the other business use cases that are listed here. And this is only an example of ones that you could consider. So the service outcomes, without a CTEM service like this, really you don't have that visibility. You don't have the visibility of the assets that can be exploited due to these hidden exposures within the environment, vulnerabilities, and so much more. With CTEM as a service, then you're really choking off all of the attack paths to your critical assets. So, the goal is, on the outcome of the service, is to mitigate all of that so those assets can no longer be compromised. According to Gartner, by 2026, organizations using CTEM and prioritizing investments based on a continuous exposure management program will be 3 times less likely to suffer from a breach. So that is a material reduction in risk associated with implementing CTEM. So in conclusion, continuous threat exposure management, and I'm speaking personally, but I think this is evolving within the industry. It is the new frontier for proactive cyber risk reduction. Just from a few key takeaways: exposures extend well beyond vulnerabilities, and a deep understanding of your full attack surface, your critical assets, and attack paths really turbocharges risk reduction within the organization. A long list of exposures, not really helpful. So what you should really integrate into a continuous cycle of scoping, discovery, prioritization, validation, and mobilization/remediation. So CTEM as a service, underpinned by XM Cyber, will help you operationalize CTEM in weeks. So this isn't something that will take 6 or 12 months to stand up. This is something that can deliver value very, very quickly within an organization. And if you're interested in being piqued and want to know more, then you can book a demo, or if you really want to see it in operation in a sample of your environment, then there is an ability also for a proof of concept to see it in action, against your own infrastructure as well. So that's the presentation piece of the webinar finished. So I hope everyone found that useful. So thanks for your attention, and we'll start looking at and see if there's any questions coming in from the audience. So feel free to use the Q&A button to pop in any questions you might have.
Ryan, I can see one related to third-party risk. Would you like me to take that one?
Sure.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll share my demo screen again, if that's okay. Just for 2 seconds.
Yep.
Here we go. So yeah, third-party risk is quite a prominent area that we're working with a lot of customers on at the moment. You've got things like NIS2, DORA, all of these kind of regulations are all calling out third-party risk, and for good reason. And the way we deal with third-party risk today is typically, we might run questionnaires, or we might have an external attack surface tool that does some, external checks on some of our third parties, but that's not a true understanding of risk to our business. So what the Integrity360 service can do, utilizing the XM Cyber platform, is take the entry points that a third party has into your business. So we can say, a third party has access to a jump box, or you've given third parties Active Directory accounts, or you've given them a cloud user or a cloud application. That is the most likely entry point into your organization. If that third party is breached, what is the blast radius from that entry point that third party has? And here you can see in this simulation, we're actually able to show, what is the impact of that third party risk, and then be able to close that down. So this idea of scoping scenarios, risk scenarios, this is kind of key to the service, and will give you a very unique understanding of third-party risk that's very specific to the actual true nature of third-party risk to your business in this way. So yeah, hopefully that's covered that. Very good question there. Again, one that we hear quite a lot about.
Yeah, that's really I think that's a lot of the power is about this concept of potential breach points, and that's why the kind of setup of the service to identify critical assets and potential breach points, whether it be from third parties or potential ransomware incident, or from either from or to an OT environment, all helps support those variety of business-led use cases, if you like, that the platform and the service can support.
Yeah, and it's very similar to the concept of mergers and acquisitions. You know, when you buy a new business, you know, you want to know what the posture of that business is. You know, where are the biggest risks? Can we actually eradicate some of the risks before we connect them, you know, via the network or cloud or whatever it is to the bigger part of the business? So, you know, very quickly understanding what the risk is to that M&A, remove the risks or the biggest risks by the choke points. And then when we connect that M&A business to the rest of the business, what is the posture now? If the attack started in that M&A business, can it laterally move to compromise the other parts of our environment? So again, as you said, Brian, when you adopt this CTEM approach or this process, it then starts to allow you to answer quite a lot of other questions that you never realized could be answered by a service of this nature. And that's really what I think the Integrity360 team and the service will do, is help uncover those use cases and actually build these scenarios into the platform to answer these questions.
Yeah, and I think we believe this is a great solution and a great service to operationalize CTEM. As I said before, CTEM is a program, so it's adopting that mindset of that continuous discovery and a scoping, discovery, prioritization, validation, and mobilization. So, you know, the key advice is that, you know, a process and a program like that, I think, is the next wave of proactive cybersecurity posture improvement. And there are different ways of doing it, but we think we've got a strong option there for organizations to consider. But, you know, this isn't just talking about a technology, it's talking about a programmatic approach to cyber risk reduction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions or queries they can send them in later on, and we'll happily respond one-on-one to any queries people might have. But I think it just remains to thank everyone for your time and attention, and thanks for joining, and thanks to Matt Quinn from XM Cyber for joining as well.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Most appreciated.
And we wish everyone a lovely day. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye now.